Hey everyone, Chef Scott here for Devil's Food Kitchen. Today we are making cheesecake. I love cheesecake. I always have since I was a kid. The first time I remember ever having cheesecake, I was maybe 8 or 9. My family was on a vacation in Colonial Williamsburg. Yep, just that cool. And we went to a restaurant one night and I had it for dessert and was immediately hooked. I've always loved it. We're gonna make New York style cheesecake today, which really refers to a denser cheesecake that's generally taller. That doesn't have to be tall, but that's kind of what's known as the classic New York style cheesecake. If you wanna just go right to the method, go ahead and do that now, but I just wanna give you a couple little tips and recipe notes before we get going. There's really only one big problem when it comes to cheesecake that most people encounter, and that is cracks on the top of the cake. Cracks are going to happen for one of two reasons. The first reason is going to be the cheesecake sticks to the pan. As the cheesecake cools, it's going to condense and kind of contract, and if it's stuck to the sides of the pan, that can create tearing. All you have to do is apply some nonstick spray or a flour butter mixture to your cake pan before you bake, and that should solve the problem. If you have cracks in the center of your cheesecake, that's more of a food science issue. So cheesecake batter is mostly fat and water. There's a little bit of protein in there from the flour and from the eggs, but not enough to create a lot of structure. And that's the real problem. If we were dealing with a regular cake batter or a bread dough, there's lots of protein. And that protein creates a really strong network that can expand and contract without tearing. When water in a cake batter or a bread dough begins to turn to steam and evaporate during baking, it helps everything rise and all of those protein chains stretch but hold their shape. Cheesecake batter doesn't have the protein to deal with rapid water evaporation. So in a cheesecake batter, if the water turns to steam and evaporates too quickly, it shoots out of the cake and there's no protein to hold firm, we get tears. It's really simple to solve that. You just need to make sure that you bake your cheesecake at a low temperature and in a water bath. A water bath is going to create a humid environment that evens the temp and keeps it low, even if the temperature set to the oven is a little bit high. You also want to make sure that you cool the cheesecake slowly as well, because while expansion can cause tears, rapid contraction can do so also. The other big problem that people have with cheesecake is lumps in the batter. We're going to go over how to avoid that and how you can fix it if you do get lumps during the method. The last thing I'll say is I've always felt that Philadelphia cream cheese makes the best cheesecakes. They are not paying me to say that. I wish they were. Over the years, I've just used a lot of different cream cheese brands, and Philadelphia seems to make the best product. If you have a different brand of cream cheese that you think makes a great cheesecake, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it and try it out for myself. So with that, let's get everything measured and we'll get started. All right, we're ready to get started on our cheesecake. I'm going to be using a springform pan for this one because I think most people out there will use something similar. I've sprayed this with some non-stick cooking spray, and that's the only prep I'm going to do. Usually I use a non-stick baking pan like this. This is a flexi pan. It's a combination of fiberglass and silicone, just like Silpats or non-stick baking mats. You could definitely use one of these, and these don't take any prep at all if you choose to use this. Our first step for the cheesecake is the crust. It's really simple. I melted the butter in the microwave until fully melted, but not hot. We definitely don't want it to come to a boil. And then I have my graham crackers here that I'm going to blend up to make crumbs. You can definitely purchase graham cracker crumbs if you'd prefer, but there's a certain irregularity when you make it yourself that I think makes a better crust, but it's an extra step. start the batter, I'm going to take my cream cheese and get it into my stand mixer to start to soften. I'm going to be using a paddle attachment for this process. I used to think that I needed to have my cream cheese room temperature to begin and have all of my ingredients room temperature. That's not the case. It's totally fine if this is cold. I'm going to add my sugar and flour to this to help it soften. I hate sifting something if I don't have to, so I'm going to take my flour, add it to my sugar here, and then I'm going to whisk that together, and that'll help break up any lumps in the flour that there might be. We've added all of our flour and sugar to our cream cheese, and now I'm going to mix on low speed to let that start to incorporate, and I'll turn the speed up as it softens. You can see this has started to soften. The sugar and the flour is well incorporated, and that's good enough for our purposes right now. So now I'm going to combine our liquid ingredients. I have our eggs here with the vanilla extract already in and added. I've got our milk and then our sour cream. I'm going to add the milk to the sour cream right off the bat, and I'm going to whisk up these eggs. And then add that to our sour cream and our milk. I want to start breaking up the sour cream first, and working from the center out, I'm going to get everything well incorporated. Now that we have our liquid combined, we'll be adding it to the cream cheese. And this is the stage that will make it or break it for lumps. We want to add the liquid very slowly at first and really scrape the bowl well in between additions. So my first addition will be very small, just enough to start to break up the cream cheese. And after just a few seconds of mixing before anything's really incorporated, I'm going to scrape everything down. Now I'll go back on and mix until that liquid is incorporated. Now we're ready for another small addition of liquid. About 15 to 20 seconds of mixing and then the scraping process. More mixing until this is fully incorporated. After two small additions, we can add a little bit more liquid than we have the first two additions. And again, after 15 or 20 seconds, I'm going to pull this off and scrape. Now we're ready to add all of the remaining liquid ingredient. At this stage, with the batter so thin, it's not as crucial to stop and scrape in the middle of mixing. I'm going to let this liquid fully incorporate into the batter, and then we can check for lumps. We have our finished cake batter here, quite smooth, no real lumps here, but if you did have some lumps, there's a couple things that you could do to fix that. One, you could take a stick blender or a hand blender and simply blend those lumps out. You risk incorporating some extra air into there, but it definitely works. Or you could pass the mixture through a sieve or cheesecloth to get some of those lumps worked out as well. We're ready to add our batter to our prepped cake pan. I have it on a sheet pan already, and I've lined mine with a nonstick baking mat. Just in case something happens to leak out of here, it'll be easier to clean, and the mat helps the cake pan from slipping around. Because there's been some air bubbles that have incorporated during the mixing process, I'm going to use a technique of pouring known as needling to try and get some of those air bubbles out. This is a technique that I actually pulled from mold making when using silicone. So I'm going to pour from a high height, and that is going to help to break up any air bubbles that might be left in that batter. Some cooks are so concerned about air bubbles in their cheesecake batter that they'll let this sit in the refrigerator overnight to give that air time to release. I don't really do that. I'm not that concerned about it, but I will give the cake pan and the sheet pan a little bit of tap to release any large air bubbles. Now we're ready for the oven. Because I've got a nice sealed pan here, I'm going to add my water directly to my pan. If you didn't have a well-sealed pan, let's say you're using a cake ring with tin foil underneath, then I might raise this up on a cooling rack on the sheet pan and then pour the water in, or you could even add the water to a separate pan in the oven. While my cheesecake's in the oven, I want to go over a couple more points about the baking process that I forgot to mention before. First and foremost, when adding your water, I always add my water to the pan once the pan is already in the oven. You don't want to add your water to your pan outside of the oven because then it's really tough to move to get into the oven without spilling water everywhere. The temperature of the water that you add doesn't really matter, and I add just enough to coat the bottom of the baking pan. The time it takes your cheesecake to bake is going to vary. It could take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, depending on how much batter you have in your pan, how well your pan conducts heat, and the quality of your oven in terms of heat conduction and airflow. What you're looking for is a slight jiggle to the cake, but it should still appear really set, and you're going to see a nice dome on top. What you don't want to do is test the cake by puncturing it. That can create a rapid release of air that will make it shrink and tear. Once the cake is done, you want to cool it slowly. I tend to turn the oven off, open the door briefly to let that initial hot air out, and then I crack the door. I like to fold a tea towel over and just leave that in the door to keep it from closing completely. That's going to create a warm environment that will cool slowly and prevent your cheesecake from shrinking too much. You also want to make sure that you let that cheesecake cool completely so that you're not moving that hot liquid in the tray. That can create burns really easily. Our cheesecake is done baking. In the end, this thing baked for over 2 hours. And if that happens with you guys, it's okay. Don't panic. It will bake. It will set. I just checked it every 20 minutes or so just to see what kind of condition it was in. I did have to add a little bit more water about halfway through the process because it was in the oven for so long. So here you can see that the cheesecake has started to shrink in from the sides of the cake pan. Now that I can handle this, I want to take this ring off. So I'm just going to take a sharp paring knife and really gently release what might still be holding from the sides of the walls. Now, nothing should really be stuck, but just as it starts to shrink, there can be sometimes a vacuum of moisture that's there, and this will help release that. So I'm just going to go along and really gently release that. I'm not feeling really any pressure at all here. And here we have our beautiful cheesecake. This golden crust is really typical. If you see that, you haven't overbaked it, that's just going to occur. And you can see that there's really no cracks on the surface at all. There's a couple little pockets from air bubbles, and that's because I didn't let the batter rest longer. You totally can do that, but again, that's mostly a cosmetic thing. Now that we have this ring off, I'm going to throw the cheesecake in the refrigerator, probably let it chill overnight, and then we get our final nice, dense, creamy texture. I hope you give this recipe a try. If you do, keep these tips in mind, and it will make your cheesecake baking experience much, much better. Number one, make sure to prep your bake pan, nonstick spray or butter, and then a light coat of flour, because you don't want that baked cheesecake to stick to the sides of your pan. Number two, add your liquid ingredients slowly in small additions and mix well. This is the best way to get rid of lumps when you are first making the batter. If you do end up with lumps, keep in mind that you can always blend them out, or you can pass them through a sieve or cheesecloth so that you get a really silky smooth batter. Make sure to bake the cheesecake at a low temperature and with a water bath. This is going to keep a nice even low heat and prevent that cheesecake from cracking when it's baking. And then cool the cheesecake slowly so that it doesn't shrink too fast and again tear from the sides or tear in the center. I like to crack the door open with a tea towel and give it at least 45 minutes before you open the door fully and move the tray out. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing because I have lots more recipes like this coming your way. And if you are a subscriber, thank you. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another DFK video when it pops up. Until next time, I am Chef Scott for Devil's Food Kitchen.